If you are looking to learn Norwegian and wish to become fluent in it, then this is the perfect video for you. Now, I'm no Norwegian teacher myself, but as somebody who was in the exact same situation as you guys a few years ago, I will be presenting to you the so-called 5C'S framework, which is a system that I've personally devised that helped me get eloquent in Norwegian to the extent that I not only started speaking Norwegian fluently, but I also started thinking in Norwegian subconsciously. What's going on, sapiens? Welcome back to my channel. For those of you who are new here, my name is Arham and I'm a 4th year medical student at the University of Oslo in Norway. On this channel, I share stuff about life as a medical student here in Norway, as well as other valuable stuff such as productivity, studying and calisthenics. So if you find that interesting, then make sure you hit that subscribe button. Now, I moved to Norway in 2013, and before I could start high school, I had to learn Norwegian, obviously, because everything is taught in Norwegian. So I attended like a eight-month course, and after about 4 months I was reasonably fluent in Norwegian. And right after the course I attended the Norwegian high school, which lasts for 3 years, and the medium of teaching and examinations is Norwegian. But still I managed to smash a high enough GPA which got me into medicine at the University of Oslo. How exactly did I manage this? Or even more importantly, how can you achieve the same? So in this video I will be sharing the so-called 5C'S framework which helped me achieve this. So concentrate, capture, create, curiosity and copy. After explaining these one by one, I'll shed some light on the most important factor for this framework to actually be successful, the why factor, before ending the video with a summary and a conclusion. And since time is the most precious thing in the world, you will find the timestamps for this video over here and also in the description box, so you guys can skip through and watch exactly the parts that you want to watch. So the first C in this framework is concentrate. So there's a difference between hearing and listening. So when you're hearing, you're simply being receptive to certain sounds and noises without really paying any attention to them. For example, I could be sitting at a cafe, doing my work, being in my flow state, right? And also hearing some sounds and noises in the background without really paying any attention to them, or without those sounds disturbing me. That's called hearing. Or in medical terms, you are simply being receptive to the stimulus or to the input without really processing that information. However, when you start concentrating on what is being said, that is when you are listening. So by concentrating, you are basically converting the passive process of hearing into an active process of listening. And why exactly is this so important? This is important because it allows you to understand how people who do speak the Norwegian language build up their structure, their sentence structures in their day-to-day lives, right? So you develop this basic understanding of the patterns, rhythms, and sentence structures. Now, how can you exactly practically execute this act of concentration? So allow me to share with you guys one way of not doing this and one way of actually doing this. The one thing that you should do is watch television serials, and the best one that I can recommend is called Scum. I mean, I know so many people that started learning Norwegian just because they enjoyed this show so much. So the first thing that you should do is listen or start watching Norwegian television shows and really concentrate on what is being said and how people or the actors build up the sentence structures. Now, the one thing that I do not really recommend is listening to music, and this is because the sentence structures in songs are far from perfect. The language used is not formal and it contains a lot of slangs, and the vocabulary used is not something many people would use in their day-to-day lives. So you need to make sure that what you are focusing on or concentrating upon is really relevant to you as a learner. Now let's move on to the second C, which stands for capture. Now, what exactly are you supposed to capture over here? So the essence is that you are capturing the meaning of a sentence before you start capturing the individual words, or before you start focusing on the words separately. And this is the first step to understanding a language, because if you start focusing or capturing the individual words, then trust me, after a certain time you will go nuts. I've been there, so been there, done that. Please avoid that. The key to learning is to establish a certain coherence between the sentences, and this will help you understand the message that is being conveyed in a much better way. Now, one example that I like to give is that you should really focus on the entirety of the necklace instead of focusing on all the individual beads that make up the necklace, or all the individual beads that are aligned together in a thread, because this will really drive you nuts, especially in the beginning when you are learning the language from scratch. Next, we have the third C in this framework, which stands for create. And this is where most people fail, not because they are not good enough or they're not smart enough, but simply because they have this fear of coming across as foolish, which really is the biggest fear all humans have. So what do I really mean when I talk about creating? So essentially, the idea is that you are mixing up the words, grammar, and sentences that you have learned, and you start getting creative with it. So for example, when you're having a conversation, start mixing up the words and start building up your own sentences and just get creative. And the beauty of being an amateur is that you can make mistakes and people will let those go without really thinking about them. Most people will not really look down upon you for trying to get better. That's the best part about being a beginner. So do not have this fear of coming across as foolish, because most people will appreciate it instead of looking down upon you. So this gives us more room for experimentation and exploration. Now let me give you guys a personal example of how I practically applied this, so that this will hopefully make you feel better as well. So when I was attending the Norwegian language course back in 2013, I heard somebody say "Jeg må hjem," which means I must go home. And after concentrating on it and really capturing it, it was my turn to get creative with this sentence. So what I did was that I went to my teacher at school and I told her, or I asked her, "Kan jeg hjem," which means "can I home," which does not really make sense, because when you are using the word "må" in Norwegian, which means must, you don't have to say go with it. So you can simply say "Jeg må hjem," which means I must go home. But when you are using the word can, then you must add the word go with it. So the right sentence would have been "Kan jeg gå hjem," which means can I go home. So that's a simple example of me getting creative while learning Norwegian back in 2013. Alright, so now let's move on to the fourth C, which stands for curiosity. And this really depends on your personal motivation and how driven you are to learn the language as soon as possible. Now, I was personally never afraid to ask questions during a conversation. I mean, I would just simply say, "Excuse me, you used this word. Can you be kind enough to explain what this means?" As simple as that. Many people do not like to give this impression that they do not know something and are therefore hesitant when it comes to asking questions. Because I mean, if you can get over this mindset, then asking native speakers is the biggest tool we actually have, because you can think of them as walking dictionaries basically, if that makes any sense. So let me throw another example to illustrate this point in a much better way. So in Norwegian, we say yes means ja, or ja means yes. So I heard somebody during a conversation say you instead of ja. And I was like, whoa, why did he just say you? Is that a slang? So I just asked this person, hey, why did you say you instead of ja? And then he explained to me that in Norwegian we say you when you are basically defying what the other person just said. So if you guys say to me that Arham, you are not a very kind person, then I will say I am a very kind person. So that's when you use the word you versus ja. So the point being, start getting curious and do not be afraid to ask questions. Now let's move on to the last C in this framework, which stands for copying. And this is the most important part when it comes to making your accent sound as close to the native accent as possible. So this is because every language has its own tone, feel, style, and resonance. And that's what you need to learn and match. And this can be achieved through two paths. Firstly, by observing, and secondly, by mimicking. So firstly, observe the native speakers. And this is different from the first principle that I mentioned, or the first C that I mentioned in this framework, which was about concentrating. Because when you were concentrating, you were basically focusing on what was being said. So that was the content and the sentences which were in the limelight. Whereas when you are observing, you are basically focusing on how that very content is being presented. So concentrating was about what was being said, whereas observing is about how that is being said. Secondly, copy what you have learned, or start mimicking how the native language speakers speak. And this will be hard at first and it might feel a bit weird, but it will definitely be worth it at the end. Now that we have discussed the 5C framework, let's move on to the why factor. So I believe that the biggest reason why I found success when it came to learning Norwegian fast was because of my drive, my motivation, and my discipline. So you need to find your why, because learning a new language can be a long and tiring journey, and unless and until you know your why, it's going to be very hard. I'm gonna be straight up honest with you guys. So let me share with you guys my personal why when it came to learning Norwegian. So I knew that I was going to live here and I needed to get fluent in Norwegian in order to really integrate into the Norwegian society. And even though everybody over here, and especially the younger generation, speaks English really fluently, I still knew that if I really had to integrate and find myself a decent job, friends, and a good social circle, then I had to learn the local language. So I knew from the very get-go that I had to remove this language barrier and actually get pretty good at it if I wanted to thrive here in the Norwegian society. And this resulted in the fact that instead of treating it as just a skill or just a language that I wanted to learn, I started treating it as an integral and fundamental part of my life upon which my future depended. So I think that's the biggest reason for, or that was the key to my success, if I'm allowed to say so. To sum up, here are the 5 C's. So firstly, concentrate. And here the idea is that you are, by concentrating, converting the passive process of hearing into the active process of listening. And the best way to do this is by watching Norwegian TV shows and films, and the one I do personally recommend is called Skam. The second C stands for capture, and here the idea is that you are capturing the bigger picture or the meaning of a sentence instead of focusing on all the individual words separately and their meanings. The third C stands for create, and the essence here is that you basically start getting creative and mixing up the words and grammar that you have learned and start getting creative with it without having the fear of coming across as foolish. The fourth C stands for curiosity, and the idea here is that you should never be afraid to ask questions during a conversation, and this will really help you expand your learning. The fifth and final C in my framework stands for copying, and here you need to do 2 things. Firstly, observe the native speakers and their style and the way they speak the language, and secondly, start copying or mimicking that very style in order to get as close to the native accent as possible. Now lastly, yet most importantly, find your why factor, as this will really help you find that inner motivation and discipline which you do need when you are trying to learn a language super fast. That's it for today, Sapiens. Thank you for watching, and if you have any questions, then feel free to contact me on my socials or just comment down below. If you found this video useful, then you will surely enjoy watching some of these videos, which will surely add some value to your lives. If you haven't subscribed already, then please consider doing so. Take care, Sapiens. Until next time, peace.